Good afternoon, and thanks for joining me for this very special dinner. If you were to think about a marriage proposal in our time and in our culture, this is a setting you might imagine. A lovely dinner, flowers, candlelight, very romantic. But marriage, and certainly marriage proposals in the time of the Bible and at the time of our story, Ruth, were very different. Marriage was more transactional, arranged, made for the financial benefit of the families involved or to maintain relationships. And there is a whole host of rules and expectations around marriage that are really different than what we might experience. And it makes it a little tricky for us to understand exactly what's going on in our story today. But to sum it up, when a man dies and leaves a widow, especially when there are no children involved, there's expectations on the next of kin to provide for that widow, maybe even to marry that widow, and to keep the name, the family line of the man who died intact. And so that culture is very, very different from ours. Also, the setting for an engagement or a marriage was very, very different in our story than it is what you see here. There's a proposal in chapter 3 between Ruth and Boaz, and it takes place in a barn. You'll remember that all through this story, the idea of harvest, the idea of food and bread plays a significant symbolic part in this story. The story takes place in Bethlehem, the house of bread. In the first chapter, Naomi and Ruth return empty without anything at the beginning of the harvest. Chapter 2 takes place in the gathering phase of the harvest as Ruth provides for her and Naomi. And now chapter 3 is set against the backdrop of the harvest already brought in, and now they're preparing it. And so we have this sense of ongoing provision in this story. So now that Naomi and Ruth's basic needs are met, Naomi hatches a plan to provide a greater, longer-term security for them, particularly for Ruth. And so she tells Ruth to put on her nice clothes, to bathe, to anoint herself with oil, to make herself pretty in a sense, or more attractive or more pleasing. These are things that would only be done under very special circumstances. And she's going to send Ruth off to Boaz. And she tells him to go to him, but to wait. Wait until they're done with their work for the day. Wait until they're done with their celebration of the harvest, the eating and the drinking. And then when it's quiet, when everyone else is asleep, go to him. And he'll tell you what to do. Except Ruth follows Naomi's instructions, and Boaz doesn't tell her what to do. Ruth, a woman of great courage to come here to begin with, proposes to Boaz. Ruth insinuates that Boaz is the next of kin, and so he needs to fulfill these expectations on him to care for Ruth and Naomi, now that they are widows. And she proposes by asking him to spread his cloak over her, and the word for cloak is wings. She's asking him to spread his wings over her. And if we remember from chapter 2, Boaz made this blessing that she had found refuge under the wings of God, and now she's asking to be under the wings of Boaz as well. Now, I don't know about you, but that's pretty romantic too, huh? But here's the catch. Here's the thing that's really interesting is Boaz isn't kin to Ruth. She's the foreigner. Remember, she's the Moabite. He is kin to Naomi. And so this proposal accomplishes so much more than just providing security for Ruth. It also provides security for Naomi. And it also ensures that the two women will be able to stay together in the same family. And so what is Boaz's answer? Yes, he'll do it. He'll do it because he's seen the loyalty that Ruth has for Naomi. He'll do it because Ruth is a worthy woman. And the phrase used for that is Ashet Hayil. It's a special Hebrew phrase, and it means woman of valor, woman of integrity, woman of courage. See, Boaz isn't just doing this out of obligation, I don't think. Boaz is doing this because he respects and values Ruth, which is impressive in the culture when women and wives were more considered property. And so we have to wonder, there's a lot of overtones in this chapter that are rather suggestive, shall we say, of maybe something not so platonic. We don't know exactly what happens. Kind of leaves us in a little bit of mystery as to what these two really feel about each other. And we get the hint it might just be more than fulfilling a contractual arrangement. But there's a catch. There's another man in town who might be a closer relative for Naomi and Ruth. And so he has to check with him first. And so this chapter leaves us on our seat wondering what will happen next. And we're still left with another question, is where is God at work in this chapter? Because God is not mentioned once except in another blessing by Boaz. But that's an important mention. It reminds us that Boaz is a faithful man, and God works through his faithful people. And God is at work in this, bringing about something grand that I don't think Ruth or Boaz or Naomi could ever imagine. And it's a great reminder to us that when we're going through hard times or good times, that sometimes when we don't see God working in our lives, we can know and trust that God really is at work. We can know and trust and have faith that God never abandons us, that God works behind the scenes in quiet and subtle ways sometimes. So I hope that's a comforting fact for you. And stay tuned for next week's fourth and final chapter as we find out where God is going with this story. Have a blessed day.